Hello, my name is William Wexler, and thank you very much, everyone in the room and everyone that is watching this on screen, for joining us here at the Atlantic Council. We are here to discuss an incredibly important issue, one that's very timely and very meaningful to me personally. We're here to discuss the 11-year anniversary of the tragedy of the Yezidi Genocide perpetrated by ISIS, known as the Islamic State. While ISIS has been defeated, the Yazidis continue to face significant obstacles in overcoming individual and collective trauma caused by these atrocities. I myself was in the Obama administration 11 years ago. I was the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Special Operations and Combating Terrorism. When I look back at my tenure, in fact, when I look back at my life, and I think of the moments in my professional experience of which I am most ashamed, most embarrassed, most regretful, there are very, very few things that come close to the experience that we all witnessed from afar of what happened to the Yazidis. And anybody like myself that was part of any government that was watching while this took place cannot help but go to sleep at night thinking what more we could have done personally and institutionally. That in no way makes up for the trauma that and the horrors that were inflicted by the people on the ground, but it does remind us of the continuing need to reflect on this experience, on the lessons that were learned, and on the way forward today for the communities that were most affected, and by the collective society in Iraq that is, and elsewhere that are dealing with the ramifications. So I really do appreciate everyone's coming here for this event and being part of this important discussion. We will hear how best the United States and the international community can today support the Yazidi people in their journey towards healing and justice. The conversation today will focus on what remains to be done to support Yazidi community in their decade-long struggle for recovery. As always, we invite everyone watching this online to stay engaged throughout this discussion by asking questions to our panelists here and in the audience here through our askac.org website. That's the best way to ask questions. Those questions will go directly to our moderator. And finally, it's important to thank the Free Yezidi Foundation who are co-hosting this event with us. Additional thanks go to the Council's Iraq Initiative and our Atlantic Council's events team, their audio video team and communication team for supporting this event. And thanks to all of our panelists for joining today. I'm going to now turn it over to my colleague, Elizabeth Hagedorn from Al Monitor, who will be moderating today's discussion and will be introducing the panelists. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Will. All right, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. It is truly an honor to moderate today's panel, which will explore what the international community, including the United States, can do to support the Yazidi people 11 years after the genocide. Before we begin, I'd like to introduce our distinguished panelists. First, Murad Ismail is the president and co-founder of the Sinjar Academy, which is at the forefront of providing education to the people of Sinjar and neighboring communities. Next, Pari Ibrahim is the executive director and founder of the Free Yezidi Foundation, a nonprofit organization established in the wake of the genocide that is dedicated to assisting Yazidis in need. And finally, bringing a valuable policy perspective to our discussion is Kurt Werthmuller. He is the Deputy Director of Research and Policy at the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom. We'll start with remarks from each of our panelists, after which I'll pose a few questions to guide our conversation. Then we'll open the floor to your questions. You can ask those at askac.org, and I'm told you can submit video, audio, or text questions, and we'll of course take questions from our audience. With that, let's do opening remarks. Pari, let's start with you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for coming here today. Some familiar faces. I think that now that we are almost at 11 years since the genocide started, there are a couple of things that are still very concerning. When we look at the Middle East currently, there's not really any stability. Then you look at the minorities, and then the situation is even worse. Look at the situation in Syria right now, a state that is run by basically jihadists, Al-Qaeda. So what does that say for ethnic and religious minorities? We're looking at the Druze right now, the situation there. And then you look at Yazidis, who are seen as infidels, as non-believers. So who can guarantee us that what happened in August 2014 will not happen again? I look at the Iraqi government, I look at the Kurdish government. What can they do for our community to ensure that it doesn't happen again? And I will say that there's no guarantees. And this is one of the very concerning points, because a lot of our people, they want to leave Iraq. Many of the younger generations do not believe in the safety and security that is being talked about orally, but is not seen in practice. And who are we all to tell them, like, no, you shouldn't leave the country? Didn't we all leave the country because of uncertainty about the future and no safety guarantees? Another thing is that it's very clear that justice is lacking. The handful of cases here and there in Europe do not provide us with a guarantee that perpetrators who committed heinous crimes against our community will be held accountable. A lot of the cases we see are terror-related. I emphasize again, this was a genocide against our people. This was a slave trade, enslavement of the Yazidi community. The mass killing and the mass graves that are still there. Like, for our community, it is not justice when we're only looking at terror. We understand that it's much easier to hold someone accountable on that basis, but for our community, this was clearly a genocide. And just to go back to a point where that I want to mention is that I'm really proud of our community. You know, it's been now 11 years, but there's one thing to say, that the advocacy of our community has been really, really strong. If you look at the amount of time it took for a reaction of the United States to start airstrikes against ISIS, for the United States and other countries to recognize that this was a genocide against the Yazidis, for the international community to step up for investigating the crimes against our people. Lots has been done in that sense when it comes to advocacy from our people itself, but there must be so much more done when it comes to the international community. Where are the women's rights defenders? Why are there 2,600 women and children still in captivity or unaccounted for? We don't know where they are. There is no clear mechanism to find and locate them. It is Murad, it is a couple of people in Iraq, it is FYF trying to look for them and see where they are. Much, much more support is needed to try to locate them. It shouldn't just be words. And then, of course, Iraq is a middle-income country. I've been now saying it for a couple of years, 153 billion budget. It's unacceptable that people are living in tents for 10 years. And you know, our people, I always say, we're very basic people. They live in clay houses. So if you, as a country, are unable to meet the basic needs, like housing, water, electricity, don't call yourself a country. You should be ashamed of yourself to have $153 billion and have thousands and thousands of people living in displacement for 11 years. And that's what I have to say to Iraq.
Thank you, Pari. Murad?
Yeah, thank you so much, Perry, and thanks so much, everyone. Thanks for the attendance. I really second what Perry said, almost everything she mentioned. It's really tiring to be advocating for a community, you know, after 11 years and try to bring some of the same issues we spoke about just 3 years after the genocide. It's been 11 years, we still try to talk about the same points. And on one issue, for example, on Syria, we were hoping that a change in Syria will bring some of the Yazidis back, but it actually went the other way. We don't know what the future will hold for Syria or or Iraq. And for us to see a genocide, for us to see the Druze people, the Alawites, the Christian and others in Syria to be attacked and killed and taken for who they are, it really hurts us. We will not be able to talk about genocide happened 11 years ago if we cannot talk about the genocide happening now. So my call is, protection of people in Syria, regardless to who they are. I would like to start with that. On the Yazidis, I would say probably the most notable thing after 11 years of the genocide is that the Yazidi community has not recovered. Whether it's the most key issues, whether it's the IDP's return, whether it's the rescue of the remaining captives, whether it's the political insecurity, instability in the Yazidi areas, all these areas remain stuck with half solutions. I call them half solutions because they are all half, and in some cases less than half solutions. About a half of the Yazidis who were taken captives, they are still captive. More than half of the Yazidis remain displaced in the IDP camps, about 15 IDP camps, under very horrible conditions, and the process of IDP return have actually been stopped for about a year now. On the justice, I would say not even 2% of justice have been achieved. If you think about it, when 12,000 people were killed or enslaved, and you cannot count 10 trials internationally and nationally, to me, that's something should go in the history books, should be human consciousness, that justice do not match. Even one crime, even 1,000 crime, or 1,000 killing and enslavement, and in some cases, our women were enslaved and raped, hundreds of times, each one of them. We did not get one trial for, you can call 10,000 crimes, and that's really not okay. I think on the security also, Yazidi areas remain largely conflict zone within Iraq, between the Kurds and the central government, regionally between Turkey, Iran, and now with a more complex situation with Syria equation added to it. And Yazidis really do not have a very strong power within Iraq. And, I call Iraq as a Sunni Shia Kurdish state. It is not a Christian state, it's not a Yazidi state, it's not a minority state, and we have no say in what happens. We really have no say what happens. The way the resources get shared, the way the decisions are made, the way the basic services, to take $5 for a service, it has to go through the Kurdish, Shia Sunni equation, and we have no say in the whole thing. That's why, if you look to Mosul, for example, Mosul has been rebuilt. They want to make Mosul Dubai. They are building an airport in Mosul. They are building a port in Basra, and then Yazidis do not even have food to eat. They do not have a place to live. And that's not okay. That a state that is conscious that will not be doing that, should not be doing that. Yeah. And I think this dynamic just made it impossible. The dynamics of just three groups in power with others without any value just made it very impossible to advance any Yazidi, any Yazidi interest. One thing like resources in Nineveh all go to the majority areas, and Yazidis are not a decision maker in Nineveh. One thing we had was a quota seat, and the quota seat now anybody in Iraq can vote for it. They already took the provisional council representation in Nineveh with the militia forces. And I think also the other issue is that the United States and the West, the key allies of the Yazidis, have dropped their support significantly over the past year. And really, I've been thinking about how can Yazidis fit into the America First policy, right? That's what all you can hear right now. For me, someone who worked for the US military for about 5-6 years, for me as an American who pursued the American dream, who worked very hard to make this country better as well, for me to see my country just focused on, interest, to me that's also not okay. To me, human rights and human values does have a weight in foreign affairs and should always have weight in the foreign affairs. Legitimatizing someone who was a former Al-Qaeda is not okay. And I hope the U.S. will look back and will refocus its efforts. The U.S. was instrumental in helping Yazidis recover from the genocide or to respond to the genocide in 2014, and we really need more support from the U.S. right now. So, a Middle East, a Middle East that's safe for everyone, I think should be the goal. But a Middle East that you can just accept the de facto solution. The de facto solution in Iraq as a state, the way it is right now, a de facto state in Syria, the way it is now, I don't think that will create a Middle East that's safe for everyone. Yeah, I think I'd like to stop there.
Thank you, Murad. Kurt.
Thank you, Liz. First of all, I do want to say thank you to the Atlantic Council for hosting this, and as my colleagues have mentioned, making sure that attention remains on this issue at a time when the world is a bit crazy and attention is very often distracted elsewhere. I'm very honored to be able to join Pari and Murad here, whose work I followed closely over the years, and their work is absolutely tireless. And of course, others have joined them in this often excruciating work, continually looking at survivor stories, continuing to try to make people pay attention is incredibly important. And as I said, it's an honor to be here today. A few opening comments. As Elizabeth mentioned, I'm the Deputy Director for Research and Policy at the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom. For those of you who might not be familiar with our office, we're an independent, bipartisan U.S. government advisory body under the legislative branch. The U.S. Congress created our commission back in 1998 through the International Religious Freedom Act with two essential parts of our mandate. The first is to do independent reporting on religious freedom conditions around the world based on international standards. And the second is to make recommendations to the administration, that is to the President, to the Secretary of State, and to Congress about how to advance religious freedom. And that, of course, is directly applicable here to the very tragic state of the Yezidi community, not just 11 years ago, but persisting until today. But I want to be quite clear up front here that this event obviously is not about us. It is about the Yezidi community. And this past week, as I was thinking ahead over this event, I was going back over some of the reporting, too few and far between, certainly, on Yezidi challenges. And in the New York Times piece in February about the search for the 2,600 women who remain missing for the last 11 years, which featured Pari's incredible work in this. There was one particular pull quote in there that really hit me like a ton of bricks, and it started off saying, "The world has moved on." And I really want to be very clear up front to acknowledge that for the Yezidi community, the world has not moved on. For those who remain in the IDP camps in Duhok and elsewhere, for those families who are still 11 years later desperately searching for their missing family members, for those who cannot resume their lives, for those who are still marginalized, and in many cases living in desperation, unable to return home, unable to recover, the initial events of the genocide may have happened 11 years later, but in a sense, the genocide still persists. And I want to be very clear of acknowledging that up front, that this is not just a matter of past tense. This is a matter of present and lived reality. And I can at least speak for my office and many other people who do care in the US government that we will not forget, not just the past, but we will not forget that these challenges are persisting. And I want to be quite clear about that up front. Having stated that and acknowledged that suffering, I'd just like to very, very briefly note a couple of items related to our reporting, just to bring everyone's attention. Last year, when it was to mark the 10th anniversary, or commemoration, I should say, of the genocide, our office did a series of reports. We had a published report and some podcast episodes looking back over the previous years and looking ahead to what things could be done to help the Yezidi community and, of course, other survivors of the parallel genocides, which unfortunately took place at that time. And I would encourage anyone to look back over some of those materials. Just last week, we also issued an update on conditions in Syria. Now, that update was not specifically about the Yezidi community, but as Pari mentioned, it's certainly relevant considering the massive question marks that remain about what Syria is going to look like moving forward. And unfortunately, as we have seen with the situation facing the Druze just in the last few weeks, previously Alawi civilians, concerns regarding the Christian communities and others in Syria, certainly the Yazidis have every right to be deeply concerned about their community members in Syria as well. In our advisory role, that is my office's advisory role to the US government, we've made a few key recommendations that I just want to note there for our colleagues in the administration and Congress who may have a chance to listen to this. One is that we do want to continue to push, regardless of some of the other foreign policy questions that certainly remain up in the air this year, of pushing to assist Iraq with building institutional capacity to safeguard vulnerable religious communities, or components, of course. Among other things, improving oversight mechanism to rein in the power of the Hashd al-Shabi, the militias, of course. And one key note here that I just want to note in closing, we also remain keenly aware of the need to continue to push for the protection and preservation of all of the important atrocity documentation that UNITAD collected, that the Yazidi community has played an absolutely integral role of making sure that that documentation was collected, and we will not forget that that information remains here and quite frankly in a box of question marks, if I can awkwardly put it that way, because how to guard that, how to protect that stuff from getting into the wrong hands, into many of the malign actors that could be interested in it, and preserving the dignity of those who bravely shared their accounts and their stories. We want to make sure that those things are protected. So these are some of the recommendations that we will continue to press the administration and Congress to pay attention to, and once again, to not forget.
Thank you. Thank you, Kurt. I have a few questions to help us unpack some of those points raised. Murad, how much meaningful progress has there actually been when it comes to holding ISIS accountable for its crimes against the Yazidis, either in Iraq or on the world stage? I believe you mentioned just 2% of justice has been achieved, is how you put it.
Yeah, and that's something that really strikes me in the heart every time I think about it. It's all this information were gathered through UNITAD, through the Iraqi judicial system, through other countries where survivors are, and none of them made it to a court system. So I think the idea of having a UNITAD was then eventually UNITAD will be upgraded into a court system where where these people can be brought to justice. But what happened is they just canceled the whole thing, canceled the whole project of justice. The other thing Iraq did was issue the amnesty law for ISIS members. So virtually, possibly, and I don't know how many of those have already got released, 13,000 ISIS members will be released from Iraqi prisons without subsequent trials or any justice. In Syria too, I think we've all been watching what happened, for example, in Al-Hol camp, where even ISIS Al-Hol camp, but also outside the Hol camp, where ISIS members who are in prison with SDF, a lot of them got out through the kind of tribal reconciliation. They've all got out. So I think as Yazidis, we look into this whole thing that our genocide have just gone eroded without justice. I think yesterday in Iraq there was they want to execute someone who's ISIS prisoner because he was involved in the massacres of Sinjar. We've just heard this news. Probably we've heard this news maybe 4 or 5 times for 11 years. Like an ISIS member was involved in the massacres of the Yazidis in Sinjar, and he will be executed. We don't hear anything else. No truth, no discussion. They don't take victims, survivors to these trials. The whole thing is a big sham. I mean, the whole thing is actually something wrong in the international protection system. If you look to the ICC, for example, there is no system for international accountability. There is nothing in place for people like us. The truth is there is nothing in place, so you just basically have to take in this pain and this suffering, and you have to live with it. And people should know that. I think for me, when I started working on this, I thought the world was like kind of a perfect place where there is always justice and justice. If something wrong happens, somebody will correct it, a system will correct it. But I think we learned that there is nothing in place. You could be suffering. I mean, all Yazidis could have been killed in that genocide or enslaved, and again, there will still be no justice because there's no system. ICC is a very weird political organization that just pursues certain cases when there's money. Security Council pursues certain cases when there is alignment of big powers, and also when all big powers agree on something. Let's say if any of the big powers don't agree about something, there is no justice for you. So it's really the whole system is just flawed, and it has to change. It has to change. It has to change. Also, I've always thought about it. You need really something both also practical, like a quick reaction force, for something the Druze are getting killed and enslaved right now. There's nobody intervening in it. But also they have to live with it for years without any justice. This thing has to change on the global stage. There must be some discussion within the Security Council, outside the Security Council. We really need a new restructuring of the whole international justice, in my view.
Go ahead. I just want to add one thing to that, because the problem in the Middle East is that there is impunity. And it's very clear and visible that any crime you commit, you can just walk away and pretend as if nothing happened. Also, not only the Middle East, right? Let's look at European countries or look at America. Perpetrators that joined ISIS members committed crimes in Iraq and Syria, and they just go back home as if nothing happened. There have now been a couple of cases like that in Sweden, in Germany. Here in the US, we have the Samantha al-Hassani case. Samantha al-Hassani is charged on terrorism charges, but Samantha al-Hassani and her husband literally bought Yazidi children as slaves on the markets. Samantha al-Hassani is now walking free as if nothing happened. Okay, she was charged on terrorism, but still, that's not justice for us. These children are traumatized for the rest of their life. Those girls were raped in that house. They were bought with American money. So if you give the message that it's okay to treat Yazidis like this in the 21st century, commit any crime you want, they'll do it again. That's why now you have a terrorist state in Syria. Who knows what crimes they committed?
You mentioned Germany and Sweden. There are a couple of countries in Europe with universal jurisdiction laws that have used those laws to successfully prosecute these perpetrators. Perry, can you detail any of those cases and what can be learned from those successful convictions?
Well, again, it will bring me back to the Yazidi advocacy. I will say, we're very proud that we have the community we have. They're doing everything they can, from Germany, Sweden, the US. We have in France a lot of Yazidis. They really advocate for justice and accountability, and then finally voices are being heard. So if they find perpetrators in their country, or perpetrators who, their citizens who went and joined the Islamic State in Iraq or Syria, they want to hold them accountable. So that's very beautiful to see that now they're taking a step further. So not only terrorism charges, of course, they always tell us that's the easiest route to hold them accountable. They traveled to Iraq or Syria. They financially supported ISIS. They committed certain crimes while they were in Syria. So it's easy on terrorism charges. But now we do see some glimmer of hope that, they're holding them also accountable for genocide. So maybe just a handful of cases, but it still is something for our community to point back to. Because, if you want to call it long time ago, the Minister of Foreign Affairs in the Netherlands, I had heard that he had said, well, if we want to call this a genocide against the Yazidis and we want to act, we really need to have an investigative team and see if it was actually a genocide. Okay, but by that time, all my people will be dead on the mountain, right? So we cannot count on all the policies and the treaties we've signed and the idea of never again. But if you lack justice and accountability, you cannot say never again means never again, because you are not holding anybody accountable for the crimes they actually committed.
Kurt, Iraq's constitution in theory promises religious freedom protections. I'm curious, how effectively is the US using its leverage, whether with financial assistance or sanctions or public diplomacy, to push Iraq to fully implement these protections? And could the US be doing more?
Great question. I can answer very simply the last part of your question, which is there's much more that we can do. Well, let me answer that in a couple ways. First of all, when it comes to the Iraqi government, I think from our office's perspective, we do and we have for a few years now recommended that the State Department name Iraq as what we refer to as a special watch list country for severe religious freedom violations, what we refer to as systematic and ongoing violations. In the Iraqi context, what that means is, yes, there are some broad constitutional protections in word, right, technically speaking. But when we look down to some of the nuances and the specific ways that that's implemented, we see a lot of shortcomings. The lack of the implementation of justice, the glacial pace of implementation of the Yazidi survivors law, laws that restrict not just the Yazidi community's ability to live in peace and to express their faith and their traditions, but other communities as well. I've had a number of interlocutors over the last couple of years, for example, point out the restriction, the comprehensive ban on the sale of alcohol across the country, which of course is a matter of livelihood for many non-Muslim communities or individuals and families, and also comes into play even with things like religious ritual in some cases and others. And that's a very small example of the way that sometimes individual laws and policies violate essential religious freedom rights. Another example of that is the world of blasphemy laws, which Iraq has on the books, where anyone can be prosecuted for saying something that might just not align with the exact religious interpretation that someone in a position of power may insist on everyone falling in line with. So there are some areas like that where Iraq simply falls behind in terms of implementing what's technically in the Constitution. In terms of the US policy side of it, look, one of the most important ways that we can push these issues, and recognizing, of course, that religious freedom is it's a central, it's a foundational right. It's right there in Article 18 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And it's in that Universal Declaration, along with a number of other essential human rights, and we recognize that. And it's really important that not just the current US administration, but any US administration actually takes direct opportunities to raise these issues. As many of our friends and colleagues here today know, the Iraqi government, and that is the federal government, that is the Kurdistan regional government, they care what the US thinks. And when US officials, especially at a senior level, raise these issues, and they remind Iraqi officials, we're paying attention to this, right? We're paying attention to these violations. We're paying attention to the fact that the Yezidi community remains largely displaced. They can't go home, and there isn't a really good plan in place to address that. When those issues are raised at a high level, the Iraqi government listens. And so sometimes it's as simple as raising it. Now, there are other levers to push. Our office pushes for things like targeted sanctions for people that are especially bad actors. I'll throw out the name here. Several years back, this was, I think, 6 years back now, of course, there were targeted sanctions placed on Rayyan al-Kaldani, who is a particularly corrosive, an individual with a particularly corrosive impact in many of these issues. And those sorts of levers can be used in other ways as well. But as I said, sometimes it's simply a matter of raising these issues at the highest level. And frankly, there are a lot of missed opportunities for that. Every time I receive a readout from State Department public messaging that the secretary met with this individual from the Iraqi government, or a CODEL went and visited, I'm always waiting just to see they raised human rights and religious freedom issues. That may happen behind the scenes sometimes, but I'd like to see it a little more prominent.
Pari, we first connected when I was in Duhok interviewing survivors in the camps. The genocide forced some 400,000 Yazidis into displacement. Why do a majority remain displaced today?
I think it is, from what we hear on the ground, a lot of them, they don't believe and trust the Iraqi government to provide them with the safety and security they need. A lot of different militias in Sinjar that make it impossible for people to live a normal and stable life. Insecurity is one of the key things. Another is people are really looking to move outside of Iraq. This is very unfortunate. I've repeated this a few times over the last couple of days that, like, nobody wants to leave their own land. And especially for minorities, once you leave your land, who's going to grab it? That's it. So Yazidis are going to lose land, and that is very, very unfortunate. Will there be a time in the future where we won't call Iraq home anymore, right? This is a big concern for many. We have a holy site in the Lalish is in Sheikhan. So for our community, there's much to stay, but there's much more to leave. And when that's the case, look at the younger generation. They do not want to stay in Iraq anymore. They really don't see a future. I mean, I don't blame them. They look at all these social medias. They see a different way of life where they have stability, where they could have a normal income, where they are safe and secure. And when that is not guaranteed, people do think differently. There's so many, even staff members of mine, they all want to risk their lives, go on a little boat and go over the sea and try to make it to a dream future. And so, yeah, I think that is one of the reasons to leave Iraq. But when you don't have a government that actually cares for you, you can see that, you can understand that. And yeah, one of the examples that Murad and I talked about the last couple of days is look at Mosul and look at Sinjar. Look at the amount of money that is being poured into areas that are not Yazidis. They are being rebuilt, but the areas for Yazidis are not. And so you have to see it as like, okay, this government maybe wants to push out Yazidis, because how can it be that 11 years later, our community still didn't get what we've been advocating for? And so even, like, as I said, the basic things are not met, and let alone climate change. Like, there's now drought, the people need water. How are they going to survive in an area that is desert-like?
Murad, go ahead.
If I may add, I mean, really the IDP's return has turned into a political problem between Baghdad and Erbil, and everybody knows that. It's nothing. It's very clear. It's a political issue. It's not a Yazidi question why they are not going back. It's a political issue between Baghdad and Erbil. You may remember a few months ago, the Minister of Displacement in Iraq said, well, we'll force everybody to leave the camp within like a week, without setting up anything for the return, without giving compensations, without doing anything. They said, we're going to close the camps. And then, well, some of us said, you cannot do that because you have to prepare the situation for people to go back. And then, somehow they with Baghdad, so Baghdad and Erbil, they made a deal to stop return of IDPs. So it's currently actually effectively now, there's an agreement between Baghdad and Erbil, and many people in the world don't know it. They do not allow Yazidis to go back to Sinjar. They do not allow people to go back to Sinjar. And this is illegal and unconstitutional. So you cannot, if you want to go back without even support of the government, you cannot get a paper telling you can go back and take your tent with you. You cannot do that. So it's really, and this is something from this event and others, I wanted to bring it up. What are they doing to the Yazidi community is not only inhumane, but it's illegal. They are blocking Yazidis from going back home.
And Elizabeth, just to add to that, so like, first the option was, okay, everybody within a week go back to Sinjar. Now the second thing is like, no, nobody leaves at all. So there's no in between. Like, okay, do you choose to go back? What can we provide you to go back? The safe return to your home, and yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Kurt, what are the political and diplomatic steps that international actors, including the U.S., can be taking here to ensure that Sinjar is a not only safe space to return to, but that there is basic infrastructure and housing?
Yeah, great question, and it's a challenge in the current policy environment. Obviously, when there's been a lot of shakeup in the State Department, a lot of questions continuing to swirl in the administration about how to address Iraq. Not to mention many other pressing foreign policy questions. And there are a lot of other issues around the region that are pulling people's attention. Obviously, Israel and Gaza is often pulling attention, tensions with neighboring Iran, and a whole host of other things. And I'll very uncomfortably use the word here the word distraction, because I realize these other issues are incredibly important as well, and I don't mean to detract from them. But for the purposes of the Yazidi communities and other displaced folks, these issues have the ability, the potential to draw attention away. And it's in that lack of attention, right? It's when these issues are kind of sitting in the shadows that things fall apart, and that marginalization becomes even more deeply entrenched. And so to come back to your question, Elizabeth, and I'll speak here to the State Department, obviously the diplomatic wing of the administration. Given all the shakeup that's happened in the department recently, obviously, we've all followed news with a lack of personnel, reorganization going on. I want to be clear that there are hundreds of deeply dedicated folks that are working in the civil and the foreign service, and lots of people, and I think Pari and Murad can attest to this as well, as we've engaged together with many over the years, people that care very deeply about the Yazidi community and other vulnerable folks. Lots of individuals who really care. What I think we need to be careful about right now is that institutionally, right, from a policy framework, that commitment continues to translate to support for the Yazidi community. What that means is finding ways to continue to keep some of what's now very limited foreign assistance going toward the community to help them out. That pressure in diplomatic terms in every possible engagement with Iraqi officials, with KRG officials, and those engagements are happening, right? We know that there's folks coming in from Baghdad and from Erbil all the time, and at every one of those opportunities, these issues need to be raised. And that pressure, and if I can put it this way, an unrelenting pressure that does not leave room for those cracks and those shadows to appear, I think that's going to be right now the most important area of diplomatic engagement. Just keep it up.
I want to remind our online audience that you can ask questions by going to askac.org. We'll save time at the end for those. Countless Yazidi families are still waiting answers about their missing loved ones. Murad, what has been the psychological toll on Yazidi families who have now waited over a decade for answers?
Yeah, it's really yesterday we listened day before yesterday we listened to Naveen, who just one of the survivors of the genocide. She spoke at the Capitol, and it never gets old. The suffering never gets old with these, and especially I would say for families who have to wait for so long. Yesterday we had a girl. She got rescued from Khanasor, from one of the families that I actually personally know. That family, they lost, called Haji Hame family, they lost about 50, 60 members of their family and their extended family members, like aunts, uncles, cousins. Everybody gathered in the farm near Khanasor, and everybody was taken. And yesterday, one of their daughters came back. These people are, also after those who came back to Iraq, they are resettled in different countries. So some are in Australia, some are in Canada, some are in Germany, some are in France. They never really had the sense of family. And the weight, the weight, I know some of these people, the way that impacted their, really every aspect of life is just incredible. Even those who survived, they almost like half survived. They really didn't survive, let's say, in a way that they came back and they are recovering right now. For a lot of them also, they have family members who left behind because a lot of the resettlement programs have now stopped. So a lot of the countries, whether it's Australia, whether it's Germany, it's really does also have another toll. Yesterday, a family reached out to me where Germany deported a Yazidi family with children. They came at night around 2 a.m. in the morning, and they deported this family, even though their kids are in the school, and even though they are doing okay in Germany, so the West is no longer wanting immigrants. The US has stopped its immigration program, that they're not allowing anyone to come. Canada does not have anything to bring the refugees. It's really, the toll on the families, because they have family members, just the way Naveen asked yesterday, that she wants to bring the rest of family back here. And I think kind of practical, on the practical term, will be really useful if some of this country will reactivate some of their immigration program, especially for the people of special cases like those who were taken captives with their families.
Pari, you mentioned that over 2,600 Yazidis remain unaccounted for. What still needs to be done in terms of either finding those women and children and or recovering their remains? Can you give us an update?
Well, I think one of the things is transparency to the families. Even like Murad was just now talking about one case, I got a phone call yesterday about a case of 2 Yazidi girls being found in Al-Hol camp. They think they're Yazidi. None of the Yazidi community has heard, like, hey, might this be your daughter? What are the names or any information? And they've asked me to contact the camp management and find out, okay, who are these girls? You'd identified them as Yazidis. Did you find out their name? Does there need to be a DNA check? Do we need to do something so that this can go and move forward? Because you have to understand that all these Yazidi families, they, as soon as there's talk about someone being rescued, they immediately think, oh, maybe, hoping that maybe it is my relative. And so that is one of the things that needs to happen. But one of the other things that needs to happen is, like, there needs to be a clear mechanism to try and find them. I think a lot of international community, they talk about basically giving up because it's been too many years and, like, yeah, what is the chance that somebody might still be alive? Well, we, the Yazidi community, are not giving up. We cannot just say, like, okay, they probably have children born from rape, and then we're just going to forget about them. We cannot move on. You have to understand from a psychological perspective, the families are all in on the same day that this happened, they are still reliving that trauma over and over again. There is no closure. Okay, we've heard of some specific women that commit suicide. We have heard of some that were killed by ISIS members. So we know at different places where their bones might be. Even now that Syria is like, not the Syria from a year ago, maybe there's an opportunity and a chance to see and investigate, okay, where are those bones at least, so that that family can have some sort of closure. There is information out there in Syria, but nobody is looking for it. So that is something that needs to happen. But also, like, as I just now said, and Murad, like, we're getting some Yazidis back by rescue efforts from the camp management. They're trying their best in Al-Hol camp to identify who the Yazidis are. I went to Syria myself to see Al-Hol camp, to see if there was an opportunity that if we had a program that could look for Yazidis, if it would be viable to do so. And I can tell you, it is. If we had the resources to be able to set up a database to identify the people from a number to faces, to identify them as a human being instead of just a number, as a statistic, then we would be already much further ahead. Also, when was this person last contacted? Some of the Yazidis who are in captivity do have communication with their families. But in many cases, they're afraid also because they have now children born from rape. There needs to be solutions, mechanisms that we can assure these women a safety and a guarantee that they can keep their children. Some of the cases have happened where these women have been resettled in different European countries and have changed their names, etc. This is a good solution, right? If someone in the Yazidi community said that they cannot accept the children born from rape, there are other solutions. So help our community to find ways to accept these women and children back, to go and look for them. Because I still remember that one of the survivors, she said to me, and it's also on tape in the documentary online, she said, anytime the planes flew above us, we were hoping that they would bomb us so that this misery would end. So how can we just accept that 11 years later, they still live in the same misery, and that is acceptable?
And I think, just one thing, I think for example, pressure on the current Syrian government, because we believe most of these people are in Syria. So if we can lift sanction on the regime in Syria, we could, just ask them to issue some statement that if anybody knows any information about Yazidis held captive in Syria, provide it to the state right now. So I think there's a big opportunity in Syria to rescue. We've had more rescues than normal. We've had at least 2 rescues over the past couple of weeks, 2-3 weeks. So I think it's possible, and it's very timely for the United States to pressure the Syrian government to issue a statement, to the public in Syria through all the channels, that if anybody knows any information about the Yazidis, to provide it to the state and then help us with the rescues.
It seems to me a very viable pressure point. I mean, at the moment, the U.S. does have an open dialogue with the transitional authorities in Damascus. The authorities ostensibly say we want to improve things, we want to demonstrate that we're changed, et cetera. And it seems to me a reasonable thing for U.S. officials to go to them and say, okay, you want to prove that? Here's an opportunity. Here is a very, very vulnerable community. We know there are survivors in the camp. The camp is a headache for you, just as it is for the SDF up in the Northeast. Work with us on this, with putting a mechanism into place. Prove that you are changing as you claim to change, and that seems to me it would be a very reasonable thing to directly bring to the transitional authorities.
Well, I think also then look also at Turkey, right? I mean, Ankara, and there's other cities in Turkey that were ISIS hotspot, and there are still ISIS members there holding Yazidi slaves. So there is a journalist in Turkey who has documented these things, and so we know, and we are looking into this, but a lot more support is necessary, and also pressure on the Turkish government to say, okay, I am sure that even police officers have knowledge about this, but they just are silent.
The United Nations team tasked with identifying and exhuming mass graves ended its mandate in 2024. What has the impact of that been?
Like zero.
Yeah.
I mean, we have not seen anything from the United Nations and helping, especially after UNITAD. So UNITAD presence was pressure applied to the Iraqi government. I think a lot of the exhumption took place by Iraqi teams, but with the support of UNITAD, they also provided equipment, they provided funding. Since UNITAD left, we have not received much more remains of our people. There will be a group of remains will come, I think, in August, like next month will come. But there are still, there's still hundreds of families waiting for their loved ones for this mass grave to be enslaved. The UN is really pulling out of Iraq. UNITAD pulled out, UNAMI is pulling out this year. The Yazidi file is no longer of interest to the United Nations as well, I would say.
I also think that, Iraq is now at the point where they are trying to show to the public that they are a country that does not need help. With the $153 billion budget and just showing the international community that we have everything under control. That does not mean that if you take out UNITAD, if you take out UNAMI, that everything is okay. Just the same with if you have a hospital and you remove the hospital, doesn't mean that there's no sick people anymore. That just means that you're not making any statistics on what is actually happening on the ground. This is what Iraq is now doing with the Yazidi community and everything that is happening on the ground. They are trying to pretend that everything is okay, but it is not. But it is worse for the Yazidi community to not have backup from UNITAD, from UNAMI, to ensure that there is justice and accountability, to ensure there is humanitarian aid.
I want to bring in a relevant audience question while we're on this topic. You mentioned the figure of 2,600. Of that number, how many Yazidi girls are known to still be in captivity or estimated to be?
So, I think we do not have that differentiation between the number, but I would say almost all of them are women, and the ones who were children when they were taken. So they were at age below 12 or 13, both boy and girls, because ISIS killed those who were, above 12, 13. They killed all the men, they left the women, and they left the children who were male. So these people, some of them, one of them who returned back, I think he's 22 now, so he's a young man right now, but he was a child when he was taken. But the rest would be women and girls, children. So I would say, you can say probably 60 to 70% are females, and then the rest are male boys who were children when they were taken.
But the idea of like how many are alive and how many are still dead, this is why I'm always saying like we need to have like a database, because they're just numbers and some might be in mass graves, some might not. So we also have to find out, right? If mass graves are not uncovered, then how will we know who was in those mass graves or not? So, and also like Yazda, FYF, other organizations have done documentation work. So we have evidence that somebody was killed in a specific place. But that number is not going back to a database that is set and ready where this person is identified as a missing person and now we can take them off of the list. This is very problematic for our community. We do not have the resources to do so. So when somebody asks like, okay, of those 2,600, 2,500 women and children, how many are still alive? I'm sorry, I'm not able to give you that answer because we don't have the resources to actually keep track of that.
May I ask
Please.
a follow-up question? Pari, particular for you, when we're thinking about this community of what we hope are survivors that are still to be located, you mentioned the really awful situation facing women who have children born of rape from these circumstances. And you mentioned that a few of them have found refuge elsewhere. Is there any ability for any of those women in that particular circumstance to return to their homes in Iraq, or can they only find refuge outside of the country?
I've heard of some families that have accepted their daughters back with the child, and I think that our community is in a place where like there's a divide in opinions. Like some will accept their family back and some will not. So it's very, very difficult. You know, you have to also understand so we're a women's organization, but you have to also understand that we're a Yazidi community with a very long history of trying to protect our identity, try to protect our religion. That means that like every time when there's a genocide, the rules will become more stricter to maintain this community, this society, because of all these attacks. And remember, this is the 74th genocide. So of course, the Yazidi community, their mindset is on surviving. Another thing is like for our community, because of all these attacks, they say we do not want the blood of our enemy in our community. And therefore they can't accept it. There's also another thing. The child that is born from a Muslim man is automatically identified as a Muslim. So these children are, from the Iraqi perspective and the Syrian perspective, these children are Muslim children. So there are a couple of things that work against these Yazidi women who have children born from rape, not all coming from the Yazidi community. But again, you know, we're a community that is trying to survive. So we're in a very difficult position.
What can you share about the Yazidi survivors law in Iraq, and what have the biggest challenges been in getting reparations to Yazidis? And for those who have received them, what difference has it made in their lives?
So, no, I think that's probably one of the positive things that we've seen over the years, and that really a resolution through the parliament, supported by the Iraqi government, but also with a lot of pressure from the United States, from Europe, from IOM, from a lot of organizations like FYF, Yazda, others, Yazidis. Really, everybody worked really hard for this law to be implemented. It got implemented to a certain way where I think at least, I don't have the exact figure, but at least 800 survivors are receiving support from the Iraqi government, financial support, which is really good. I mean, one thing, you don't want people to come back and then they have to go work immediately because they are not in a situation to start working. So I think the reparations is really good, but a lot of other aspects, let's say, whether it's housing, whether it's legal support, whether it is health, all these have not moved along, but it is getting implemented, and I think more support in that area is needed. But it's also like, I think one drawback on that law is just like limiting the victims to, let's say, the 1,000, 2,000. But if you look really, the entire Yazidi community are victims. You know, if people, let's say, if somebody lost their parents or their brothers, they are not part of that law. So it does not really contain a lot of, or does not, it does not contain a lot of victims. It's just a small segment of the people who suffered.
I think also there's a lot that is still missing with the Yazidi survivors' law, as Murad said. Like, there was supposed to be psychological support, there was supposed to be education, there was supposed to be housing. All these things are not visible, only the part that's monetary, that they get a sort of stipend each month. With that is also another issue where, like, a lot of these survivors, aside from that little bit of money, they have nothing else. So they have to then start providing for their whole family. So it is a good thought, it's good that it's being implemented, but we're far, far away from it being perfectly well done for these survivors.
With that, I think we're going to start to take some audience questions. We have a few that have come in online, and for those in the audience, we can get you a microphone. We have one right here. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Dler Osman. Before everything, I'm a Yezidi genocide survivor. I was 11 years ago on top of Mount Sinjar, a shoeless kid trying to survive and seeing people die. So I'll try to represent that kid as much as I can. And I want to follow up in Mr. Murad's question, is that the problem with the Yezidi genocide, the way it has been framed, is that it started in 2014 with ISIS, and now that ISIS is gone, it's over, right? But what led to that moment were decades of dispossession, of exclusion, of oppression by the dominant groups in Iraq that have tried to dispower the Yazidis as much as they can, including the way the restructuring of politics was done in post-2003 Iraq. Yazidis were dispossessed, their power was taken from, their resources were taken from for years. And today, after ISIS is over, this condition has been made even way worse. Sinjar is destroyed today. It's disconnected from every region in Iraq with tens of police control stations. Yazidis are suffocated today. I had, for the first time, the chance to go there after years of exile a few months ago, and I felt as unsafe in Sinjar as I was in August 3rd. My question is for Mr. Cord and for anybody who wants to answer, is the Western world, including the United States government, is unaware of how the Yazidis are put under those conditions for decades? And it's not just a question of humanitarian bunch of support and so on, it's a political and structural, systematic question. Is it unaware of that, or is it just the world of politics that we all have to be diplomatic and keep it within the acceptable framework of language? Okay, thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
Can I ask everybody to stand for Delir, because he's one of the few that was able to survive.
Yeah, well, first, again, I recognize your bravery and your survival, and many of us are in awe of all of you who experienced that, and I'm sorry that you did, and I'm glad that you're here. To respond to your question, first of all, I do want to note, because you made a few very, very key points. One is that, as you mentioned, the genocide itself, and of course the ongoing aftermath, and in a sense the ongoing genocide, did not happen in a vacuum. Yes, it's true that a particularly vicious and bloodthirsty terrorist organization perpetrated those events in 2014, but they were also building on generations of discrimination and marginalization, dispossession, all the things that you mentioned. And Pari said something very striking earlier as well, which is that for the Yazidi community with a long-term memory, this is the 74th genocide that the community has faced over a period of centuries. That's a staggering number. And from a policy perspective, to answer very succinctly your question, yes, there are many of us in the US government that are aware of that. Sometimes in a very frustrated sense of having our hands tied to really affect change, but still trying very often behind the scenes of affecting that. But here's what I want to say to that. There's short-term and long-term policy issues at play. The short-term is a lot of the things that my colleagues, Murad and Pari, have been mentioning here, things like transitional justice, things like implementation of the Yazidi survivors law, identifying and bringing home survivors that are still out there. In a sense, those are the short-term things that have to be fixed right now, right? It's the urgent. But the important is, and this is something that if there is a will within US foreign policy to do so looking at, there's a long-term issue of working with Iraq to the extent that it is willing and able. And I want to be clear, that's a big question mark, of affecting change in Iraqi society as well. Because if things persist in the way that they always have, we're going to come back to this point again, I'm sorry to say. If there aren't measures in place through things like the public education system, right, to eliminate material from the curriculum, and I'm speaking here broadly, I can't point to specific things because I know there have been efforts for some curriculum reform in Iraq. If there are means to eliminate from society, certainly the public support for those, that demonization of the community, the marginalization, the rumors and the misinformation about the Yazidi community that's been so pervasive for so many years. Those sorts of things, and frankly, it's programmatic, right? And that needs money, and it needs political and policy support to provide those things, and that's a challenge at the moment. But I do recognize, and many of us in the US government do recognize, that those are long-term systematic issues, and we need to find opportunities to push the Iraqi government to make those changes, and to the extent that we can to work with them, right? There's people willing and saying, we'll help you, we'll work with you if you want to do things like make sure you're, again, from your curriculum to your all sorts of state-sponsored things to your government mechanisms, that they do everything they can to mitigate this sort of misinformation and mischaracterization of Yazidis. And on the reverse side, right, it's not just saying bad stuff, but on the reverse side, to creating an environment of inclusivity for Yazidis, for Christians, for Sabines, right, for Kakais, for all these communities that are marginalized, of proactively creating space in society. And because I am afraid, I share your fear as I hear in your voice, that without those long-term transformations, we're going to find ourselves back at square one, and none of us want that. So I hope that at least provides some measure of reassurance.
Kurt, can I? Oh, go ahead.
I would like to add one thing to Delir and also to the rest of the Yazidi community. The advocacy that we're doing, it needs to continue. Murad and I talked many times about it is exhausting to always talk about genocide, and the thing is that it never ends, especially if you keep and work on it. But look at the Armenian community. They still, 100 years later, they still advocate for their community. And we need to keep doing that too. Even if we have to knock on hundreds, thousands of doors, one will open and one will be interested in hearing our story. And I think that by doing that, people will never forget. And the chances of it coming back again, at least we can, if it ever happens again, we have the right people and the connections to immediately get action. And I think that we didn't have that very much in 2014, but now we definitely have. But we need to stay strong and continue this.
Let's see, I'm trying to pull up this question. Okay, thank you both. We have a question that's come in from online from Brian Gorman. He says, having spent time in Iraq working on a project regarding access to civil identification docs for IDPs, we know access to civil identification documents is key to access services and reintegration. What is the status for Yazidis in the camps and in general to access these documents?
I have one specific case, for example, just recently, we had a team of lawyers who would support any Yazidi, displaced Yazidi. One of them is actually, I think, pictured here. He escaped out of captivity and he needed documentation, and our lawyers were able to get all his documentation, and he was able to apply for the support that he wanted. Yeah, a lot of people don't have documentation, and there needs to be support to get that documentation. But I will be honest, with all the recent cuts on humanitarian aid and support, our community didn't have a lot, and now it has even less. So it has a big impact on a community like the Yazidis, who are trying to overcome genocide and try to build a structure, a stable life. It doesn't happen like 1, 2, 3. You know, our people don't have the riches like other people in the world. So it's very difficult to even get the basic needs like identification. Like, that program has ended. I don't know if Yazda or other Yazidi organizations have a similar project to help and support them. But when that goes away, then what is there in place of that?
So I just want to add to that, because so currently the Yazidi areas, whether it's Sinjar or Snouni or Qahtaniya, the sub-districts, none of them have a mayor or a regular office work. So for you to get anything issued, many times, most of the times, you have to go multiple times between Duhok and Sinjar to get a single paperwork approved. You know, I was there last year and I saw that chaos. This chaos have been going on for 11 years now, that Iraq does not want to appoint a mayor for these places. And I think the question is, do they want people to actually live there, or they want people to leave? And I think it's, I mean, at least it's not important for them people to go back, because they make it so difficult for you to go to Sinjar. They make it so difficult for you to even pass anything through checkpoint. A couple months ago, we had some books. We want to take some books to Sinjar. It took us like months to get some books from UK to Sinjar. Then you know, couple months later, you see drones go from place in Iraq. So basically, it's easy for you to mobilize drones inside Iraq than to mobilize books inside Iraq. And it's really, it's unbelievable. I think the way they treat the Yazidi community with so much, you know, with so much oppression, with so much, it's kind of, you feel it's a targeted prejudice, not just ISIS, but a targeted work to force you to leave your country.
Do we have any?
Also, don't forget that uneducated Yazidis are not a bother to them, but educated Yazidis are. So that's why maybe getting books in Sinjar is difficult. They want to keep us uneducated.
Do we have any more questions from our in-person audience? Yes, we have one right here.
Okay, thank you so much. My name is Dakhil Shamo. I'm Yazidi and living in DC for almost 25 years. I have two comments, not questions. First, to add to the answer of Murad and Perry regarding your questions of returning of IDPs and why not going back. It is politics, as they say, it's politics, and differences and disagreement between KRG and the Ministry of the IDP Affairs in Iraq. And it's mostly personal differences. It's to that level. So that differences and disagreement is politics. And it's been there forever, and it will not end. My issue is that, I keep saying that, there should be a third party between both the Ministry of Affairs, which is led by one of the Chaldean affiliated party, and the KRG. So there should be a third party that helping in this, because it's not money, it's not anything but politics. If that politics issue, disagreement solved, things are okay. But it will not without other parties and without the pressure of the US government and other player in the internationally. The second point I would like to say, it's about the annual reports of the International Religious Freedom Commission, that is I'm familiar with that. Been working for Voice of America for more than 25 years. Every year, every time when the report is out, I follow it, I read it, and I would say I'm honored to be one of the one of people that I provided some information about the abuses and the abuses of the human rights and especially the minorities to add to these reports. Some of them, not all of them, even before the genocide happened. My issue is this. I think there is either miscommunication or misunderstanding between the players. I know you advised the White House, the State Department, the Congress about what happened, and they reported to them. And whenever they report, I do my job to report and to interview people about that, and even the Iraqi government or the KRG government. The thing is, they denied, or they simply said, oh, this report is just, it's exaggeration. It's not like that. And they blame other peoples, for example, oh, ISIS did that, or this, that. And without following up with them, the case is closed. So that's why I think it's misunderstanding or miscommunication, one of them. So without following up with them, telling them, hey guys, this happened, it's not enough to say, to deny it. No, it's true, it's happening, so do something about that. So that's my question. That's what I understand, and it's not been one, it's been years and years that they're following up. The report is there, they denied, their spokesperson come out and said, oh, the exaggeration is not like that. Mm-hmm. So I don't know, is there anything to do to follow up with these governments and pushing them to do something about that? Mm-hmm. Iraq will say, oh, we did not do nothing, we did not do wrong, it was ISIS, and ISIS is gone, as concern of Ayad is. The problem is there, it will not end.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Sure. Well, I can respond in terms of our reporting. And first, I'm very glad to hear that you followed reporting for years, and I've somewhere on a table back there are some of our most recent annual report chapter on Iraq and some of the other reports that I mentioned earlier. We do our own independent reporting. And what that means is we follow mass media like others, we follow social media, but we also, very importantly, we receive documentation from civil society. And that independent reporting is really important for us. And what that means is we don't take anyone's assessment of the situation at face value, whether that's our other offices within the US government or whether that's foreign governments. And the Iraqi government, and which I will say has engaged with us. We have an open line of communication with them. But just as we would do with any other government, when we have a conversation with them, or they send us letters, which is the case sometimes, and they say, and I can't think of a specific example of this, and it would be privileged even if I had something in mind, to deflect or to say, well, this is really on someone else, this isn't really our issue. We can't take that at face value. So all that to say, if you look at one of our reports and you see information that appears omitted, I can assure you that it's not because another government told us this isn't right, we don't like it, and we said, oh, okay, and removed it. It would be more likely an omission of, if I may be blunt, space, because in an effort to get our reporting out to as many people as possible, they tend to be quite concise, especially our annual report is 2 pages. And that means sometimes that we're not able to include as much specificity and nuance as would be ideal. But it also means sometimes that either we've been still doing our own independent corroboration of evidence and documentation, or we're holding, close holding that information for private engagements. Because our commission, we have the means to do public reporting and public advocacy, but we also have the means to do that behind the scenes as well. Sometimes that's engaging with foreign governments, sometimes, we're not diplomats, but we still can engage. And sometimes that may also mean when we engage with members of Congress, because that's part of our mandate, to make sure that they're aware of these things. So I would encourage you to continue to pass along documentation, because it's absolutely essential for our independent reporting. And I can assure you that even if you don't see it, explicitly appear in our reporting, we're still taking it very seriously and keeping that within our independent role.
We are out of time for questions, but I wanted to give our panel the opportunity to address any closing thoughts you might have on these issues. Murad?
Yeah, no, so I think really just pressing issues, what's happening in Syria, whether that will pose existential threat to the Yazidi community in Iraq and how that will be in Syria. I think that's really when ISIS, I remember when ISIS was expanding from Syria to Iraq, a lot of us were just like not conscious about it. Eventually genocide happened. You know, with Al-Qaeda committing genocide against the Druze and others in Syria, I really don't know, and potentially them attacking the Kurds in the northeast. I don't know what will happen to Sinjar when the back or few miles away Al-Qaeda is in control again. So I'm really taking that very seriously. To recover from the previous genocide, I think we need more tools and instruments to be able to push the Iraqi government and the KRG to act, and that some of it within the Yazidi community that have to organize a little bit more better, but a lot of it also the international community should pay more attention. And yeah, I think we're not going to get full answers for almost a single question we've had or a single need that our people had, but the more we can do, the more we can achieve. I think getting the Yazidi community in Iraq into some stability, some sort of future, a long-term existence in their land. I think that would be good. The international community not accepting refugees anymore. That's another thing I think the world could help. Give exemption to the Yazidis. A lot of Yazidis were actually due to come to the U.S. Then they told them you're not going to come. Yazidis get deported from Germany as we speak. And I think for you to push away victims of genocide and treat them in such a way, I don't think that's okay. So I just hope the work continues. And our friends, people who are friends of the Yazidi community, a lot of you are here in the audience. Yazidi community, we don't have planes to gift. We don't have oil fields to give you oil, but we have a case, a human case, which I think should matter to everyone in the world, that nobody should be killed for who they are, nobody should be enslaved for who they are. And if it can happen to us, it can happen to the Druze, it can happen to anybody else. I think the cause of human rights and protection of people from mass crimes, I think is a global cause that we all should invest in more. Thank you.
I would like to just add that, ISIS was militarily defeated, but I think the ideology is still there, and the ideology has spread everywhere. So that means that nobody goes to Europe wearing a T-shirt that says, I was part of the Islamic State. So especially for European countries, be aware that there are ISIS members who travel to Europe and now are asylum seekers. And soon you might see the things that happened in faraway Middle East might happen in Europe as well. So don't think that this is a fight that is over and it only is a fight for the Yazidis to fight. It is one that the international community should be very, very aware of. And especially now that the jihadist state-run Syria is powerful and everybody pretends that it's just okay to first be a jihadist and now you can become an official and shake hands with the people who matter. It is very daunting to see that.
In closing, very, very briefly, I'd like to say, first of all, as I mentioned up front, I want to acknowledge and express my Commission's support and commitment to continuing to stand alongside the Yazidi community and others who have suffered in Iraq. In many ways, the ability of the Yazidi community to be able to express their religion, their beliefs, their practices, their traditions, their very unique and distinctive identity as a community is not only crucial to, as Murad has said, to human rights, right? This is a moral case, and that's an absolutely essential point. But it's also important for Iraq, generally speaking. If Iraq is going to succeed as a nation, and we want it to, right? We want it to be a partner of the United States. We want it to be a fully fledged member of the international community and to succeed economically and socially and to be safe and prosperous. It cannot be those things without providing full protection of religious freedom and other essential human rights for its citizens. And that includes the Yazidi community. It includes others who have been marginalized and whose young people, as my colleagues have pointed out, are thinking of nothing but leaving. Iraq will be a far, far less dynamic, prosperous, rich place that cannot live up to its potential without protecting and preserving these communities that make such a unique and distinct community as Iraq can and should, and we hope will have.
I want to thank our esteemed panelists today for advancing not only our understanding of the Yezidi genocide, but how the United States can provide some measure of accountability. I would also like to thank the Atlanta Council and the Free Yezidi Foundation for hosting this event and providing a platform for such an important and timely dialogue. And thank you to our audience for being here.